So your first visit of 2018, it's here in China, the world's biggest exporter. What's your main focus of this trip? What would be a win for you here in China?
Well, we're talking about trade and investment together. Too often people will disaggregate them and talk just about trade. Clearly, our trade with China is worth about £60 billion, and we saw a big rise in UK exports to China last year, about 32% increase, one of our biggest in the globe. But we're also interested in how we get that investment relationship right. One of the strongest relationships the UK has in the world is with the United States, because it's not just about our trade, it's the amount of money we've got invested in one another's economies, the biggest relationship of that sort that we have. So we've been looking at China not just as an inward investor to the UK, but how we can get better partnership and collaboration in a whole range of areas, tech being one of the ones that we're focusing on at the present time.
You said that you want to line up potential trade deals for when the UK leaves the EU. Is that on the cards with China? Is there anything in progress?
Well, we'll be talking about how we will look at our future trade relationship. I think in terms of an FTA, a classical FTA with China, that would still be somewhere down the road for us. But of course, we want to improve our trading position with China as much as we can. As I said, that also includes our investment relationship. So how, for example, do we take the explosion of tech startups in the UK in a way that we can collaborate with Chinese partners? The UK's had about 58,000 tech startups in the past year, but there's a limited market, obviously, for us to sell into. China, on the other hand, has a very big potential market for us to sell into. What
would be the barriers, what would be the potential stumbling blocks of setting up FTA negotiations with China?
Well, there are no particular stumbling blocks. We'll want to see how some of the big investment groups in China might have an interest in the UK, how we might develop partnerships that might help incubate some of those businesses, how we might see market access in both directions. The trade and investment relationships work best when both parties are going to gain from it, and that's the sort of discussions we're having. That's why I'm off to Shenzhen later on in the week, the tech hub of China.
Financial services, obviously very big for the UK. What potential do you see for expanding trade in that area between the UK and China?
Well, one of the discussions I'll be having with my Chinese counterpart will be about the service sector in general. How do we get better access to the service sector here? What are the Chinese government's hopes and fears about opening up the service sector? We'll want to get an idea of what the opportunities may be. And again, as we look to future trade, we'll want to get a feeling from one another of what we see the potential in both directions to be.
It's been reported that the UK is in informal talks to join the TPP. Is this true? And how would you make a deal like that work for you?
Well, of course, TPP has not yet been negotiated, or the successor to TPP has not yet been negotiated, so we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But of course, for the UK, we've said that as we leave the European Union, we want to create a genuinely global Britain. We want to look to the trading opportunities that exist in the parts of the global economy that are expanding fastest. The IMF says somewhere around 90% of global growth in the next 10 to 15 years will be outside the European continent. So we'll want to explore all the opportunities. I would say that we would be foolish not to look at all the potential.
But joining a deal like that would involve sort of dismantling almost a lot of the tariff apparatus that you've built up as an EU member. Is that something that you'd be okay with?
Well, while we're not ruling anything out, it's not something that's right at the top of our agenda at the present time. But again, I say that it would be quite wrong for us to rule anything out in terms of future relationships for the United Kingdom.
What about NAFTA on that note? Are there any talks or any sort of discussions about joining that deal?
Well, of course, the priority there would be the maintenance of CETA, that Canada has already agreed with the European Union, and we've said that we want to ensure that we get continuity of the EU's trading agreements as we leave the EU. Where the United States sits is that we already have working groups with the United States on a whole range of issues, including scoping out a potential future trade agreement. So we're looking at all our options. What you can say in the totality of that is that Britain is expanding and widening its global horizons. Some people took the view that our vote to leave the European Union was a vote for insularity. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. This is a genuinely outward-looking Britain that we're seeing emerging from that referendum.
But first on the agenda, and I know there are a lot of what-ifs in this situation, would be heading towards some sort of FTA with the US?
Well, our priorities are to get our trading schedules done in Geneva at the WTO, then to get continuity of the EU's free trade agreements. There are around 40 of those. We want to ensure we get continued access to places like South Korea and Switzerland, Canada, where the EU's got those trade agreements. Once we've done that, we can look at new free trade agreements, because remember, we're not allowed to negotiate new free trade agreements while we're still in the European Union. So we need to do a lot of groundwork. We've got 14 trade working groups with 21 countries at the present time, as we look to see how we can improve our trading position. And actually, whether Britain had stayed in the European Union or not, we had to improve our trading position, because as a proportion of our GDP, we're well behind countries like Germany, for example, in terms of our exporting performance. So one of the aims of my department has been to help boost that trade in exporting performance for the UK. Last year, we saw that rise by about 13%, which was a great performance in terms of global trends. So we need to ensure that continues.
But all this work could be for naught if the full alignment issue, the hard border issue with Ireland, if that means that independent trade deals with the likes of China, the US, Australia are sort of ruled out, it would all be for naught. Would that be a waste of opportunities presented by Brexit to you?
Well, first of all, as I said, whether or not we'd stayed in the European Union, we needed to improve our trading performance in terms of the market penetration of the markets we already have agreements with, or we're operating under WTO. We've seen substantial improvement in that. Leaving the European Union will open up opportunities for us to conduct our own independent trade policy. As far as the EU is concerned, we've made it very clear that we want to maintain an open and comprehensive trade agreement with the European Union. Why? Because that's good for Britain and it's good for the European Union. Because looking at Europe from this part of the world, if we were to see the emergence of impediments to trade and investment in Europe that don't exist today, I think that would send the wrong signal to global investors who, remember, have other places to put their money other than Europe.
But
One more.
Last one? Okay. What do you think is the biggest threat to the Brexit process right now?
Well, I think that Brexit is going to happen. All the predictions of doom and gloom haven't quite happened. They told us that we would end up with parity with the euro and near parity with the dollar. That has not happened. They told us that we'd end up in recession. In fact, we've seen our economy grow. They said we'd see 500,000 jobs lost. Instead, we've seen jobs continue to grow in the UK, with that record employment now in the UK. We've seen record foreign direct investment into the UK, and we've seen our export performance up. None of those are on the downside, and I see great opportunities for the United Kingdom. The biggest risk with Brexit are those people who are self-defeating pessimists talking down Britain's opportunities.